China has denied responsibility for these attacks and says that ASPI is behind the hacking claims. Is that correct?
No, that's just laughable nonsense and really doesn't stand up to much in the way of serious scrutiny. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, he's advised by his intelligence agencies, which I believe have been providing him with forensic information about what's been going on in the last few months. As soon as the Prime Minister gave his press conference, I started to receive calls from good people like you in the media asking me for my opinion. So that's the extent of ASPI's involvement. Is we're trying to provide some analysis and understanding for the broader public, but to suggest that somehow this is a confected thing that's come from us, that's just a bit of diversion from the Communist Party in Beijing.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman also said that ASPI was funded by US arms companies. Is that correct to any extent?
We receive some of our funding from Australian defence industry. And as I've said, if you don't support Australian defence industry, effectively what you are doing is wanting the Australian Defence Force to be disarmed. So defence industry is really important. And yes, indeed, we do get a small proportion of our funding from companies like that, which I'm very proud of. I think they play an enormously important part in Australian security.
Why do you think then that China has specifically named ASPI here?
Well, over the last year or two, we have done some quite significant forensic research, including a great deal of work in Mandarin, the Chinese language, around a range of issues which the Chinese government doesn't like. We've produced reports on forced labour using Uyghur prisoners. We've produced reports on China's United Front Work Department, which is the agency responsible for pushing Chinese propaganda around the world. And work on Chinese propaganda delivered online. It's accurate, thoughtful, careful work, and I think it's extremely discomforting to the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other parts of the Beijing establishment. So they're attacking us, and that's fine. We have broad shoulders. In a democracy like Australia, we have freedom of speech, which is something that you also don't get in China, and I think the Chinese officialdom finds that uncomfortable and unusual.
I think there was a bit of confusion after the Prime Minister's press conference yesterday, and over the course of the day it seems that there wasn't a specific new cyber attack that was being talked about during that press conference. Is that your reading of the situation? And if so, what do you make of the timing of that press conference and the point of that press conference from Scott Morrison yesterday?
Look, I think there have been actually a significant number of new attacks which have not yet been, frankly, may never be publicly reported. So on the one hand, what we have is over a period of years, a very consistent Chinese interest in hacking our parliament, which they did in 2011, the Bureau of Meteorology in 2016, the Australian National University in 2018. They're just the ones which kind of found their way into the public realm. Beyond that, China is actively working to infiltrate our parliament, our political parties, our government departments and businesses all the time. What's new, and I think what led to the government's press release yesterday, is that there is now a much higher intensity of that Chinese effort, which has come about mostly since the COVID virus. And I think it's just become so substantial, so overwhelming, that the government felt it necessary to go out yesterday to say what it did and to warn Australian businesses in particular that you need to get your cybersecurity up to standard if you're not to become subject to these attacks.
And on that issue, the Prime Minister said yesterday that this is a new world that we are living in now, and this is an ongoing threat that Australia will have to deal with. How prepared is Australia to deal with that new threat?
In terms of cybersecurity, it's a mixed picture. The national security elements of government and the federal government, I think, are pretty well protected. So are our banks, which we can all be happy about because we rely on that for our financial security. But when you get to areas like our universities, when you get to state governments and many smaller businesses not connected with defence, cybersecurity can be quite poor. I mean, the good news is that it can be fixed relatively quickly, but it takes attention. And I think that's really what the government is saying is businesses, universities, the state governments, they have to do this in order to protect themselves because China is going after these areas precisely because they're weak. That I think is something that we will all have to pay more attention to.
What's the purpose of hacking these agencies, though?
There's multiple purposes. At the top level, it goes from understanding the political intent, the political thinking of our leaders federally and in states. China also has globally an interest in intellectual property theft, and it has been able to strip tens of billions of dollars of intellectual property value from the democracies over the years. China is also very interested in understanding what its diaspora is thinking. China does not really recognise Australians of Chinese background as being Australian citizens. They think of them as something that the Chinese government can control. So at every level, from state secrets through to business information, through to the private thinking and views of Australian citizens, Chinese intelligence is massively interested in all of that.
What specifically should companies and industries in Australia be doing better to help guard against these sorts of attacks in the future?
They need to make sure that their IT systems are completely up to date. That is to say, patching those systems with updates when they become available, because often those patches are designed to block gaps that hackers can exploit. They should be working with the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, which is a centre of excellence that provides information that the government understands about where current threats are coming from. I think all companies should be lifting their cyber awareness, not just at the level of the IT person that's looking after their systems, but to their boards and to their senior management. Because frankly, information is the new currency of this century, and protecting it is absolutely critical.
What about at an individual level? Should Australians be looking at the way they organise their own online activity, and should they be concerned about changing their online habits?
Absolutely. So one of the most important things to do is any device which gives you access to the internet, you should be looking at two-factor authentication. That is to say, 2 levels of security before you put yourself online. That's easy to do. It's a little bit bothersome, and I guess that's why a lot of people don't. But I can tell you that China is interested in big data. It's interested very much in individuals' records, because it all goes to what is being built in China, which is an artificial intelligence capability that has got significant predictive capacities, and all information can support the development of that knowledge. So yes, people should not imagine that this is a threat that exists for someone else. It's something that we all have to take responsibility in. And of course, beyond China, you've got to be worried about cyber criminals who are interested in tapping into your accounts and taking your money. So there is vulnerability for all, and we all have to take personal responsibility to make sure that we're secure.
Peter Jennings from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, my pleasure.